Hey, we are now at park. It's Monday, April 1st, 2024, exactly the 79th anniversary of the Battle of Okinawa, which began on April 1st, 1945. So the reason that this particular memorial is called the Peace Park in Okinawa is interesting to me is because my dad, Christian Adam Sile, actually fought here in the Battle of Okinawa. My dad was part of the 10th Army 77th Infantry Division and 307th Regiment that actually started the invasion of the islands before April 1st. During March of that year, they started by invading the Kurama Islands, which are about 15 miles south and west of Okinawa. And then from the Kurama Islands, they jumped to Keese Island, which is about 11 miles west, directly west of Naha, which is the main capital city of Okinawa. And then after the Kurama Islands and Keese, they jumped to Iljima, which is a small island just barely west of the main part of Okinawa, where there's an airstrip that was very important in the war effort. It gave the U.S. A landing base for the airplanes, but also it was the place where the delegation from Japan, when they surrendered at the end of World War II in August of 45, their airplane flew from Japan and landed on Iljima, and they switched to American transport, which took them up to the Philippines, where MacArthur was waiting for them, and they signed unconditional surrender papers. So this is the area of the park uh, that contains all of the names of the people who were killed during the battle for Okinawa, and there are more than 242,000 names on these granite blocks that have been inscribed. And of those 242,000, there were 12,520 U.S. military killed. A total of 36,631 wounded, which are not listed on these stones. So our casualty rate was 35 killed or wounded of the troops that participated in the battle, which is significant. It was actually a more difficult battle than Iwo Jima. The name of the battle was Operation Iceberg, is what the U.S. called it, and they also called it Typhoon of Steel because of the numbers of ships and airplanes that participated. So Captain Holden Hardcastle of the U.S. Air Force, who's stationed at Kadena Air Force Base on Okinawa, was our tour guide, my nephew, and he was good enough to spend the day with us. There's Captain Hardcastle right there. And he's taken us over to the American section. This one section over to the left is the location where all the American names are inscribed, and I think they're divided up by military branch between the Navy, the Army, and the Marines. There were 4,907 Navy people killed in the ships. There were 4,582 Army people killed in battle, and there were 2,792 Marines killed. And then since those numbers were developed, they've discovered a few more, bringing the total up to 12,520 U.S. service members killed. So we were checking the stones for any. There's no hard castles and no siles, thankfully, listed. Holden's pointing out. I think those were the S's, and I'm not sure which branch of the military that wall was for. Anyway, the vast majority of the people that lost their lives there were Japanese and something like 150,000 Okinawans that the Japanese conscripted into service were killed, including 2,000 children. The Japanese conscripted some children out of school and made them fight, and there were 2,000 or so casualties of young children. There were 82 days of fighting starting on April 1st on the main island. The invasion was actually a larger invasion than D-Day in terms of the number of planes and ships and equipment. And it was at a time when the Japanese started kamikaze attacks. 50 airplanes as kamikaze, essentially piloted cruise missiles to attack the U.S., mostly the ships. The U.S. had 26 ships sunk and 168 ships damaged by the kamikazes. And including those killed, there was 10,000 sailors were either killed or wounded. So the losses by the Navy were horrendous. More than 50,000 people landed on day one of the battle on April 1st, and it was a relatively easy landing compared to D-Day. The Japanese really didn't counterattack until April 6th, when they sent the kamikaze planes and the battleship Yamato, which is the largest battleship ever constructed. And the U.S. was able to sink the Yamato on April 7th. So that took out a lot of the heavy gunfire from the Japanese side when the Yamato was sunk. So of note, the highest ranking officer killed during World War II was General Buckner, who was killed on June 18th, shortly before the battle ended. The hostilities ended on June 21st, and he was killed on June 18th as he was at a forward observation post looking at the troop layout. Anyway, this park is right at the very southern tip of the island, and it's where the U.S. forces finally chased all the Japanese troops down to this very southern point. This is looking east. And I'll show you later on from the observatory a better picture, but there's a hill at the very southern point where the final Japanese deaths occurred. Their commanding general and his chief of staff both committed suicide, and most of the Japanese would die rather than be captured. And they told the Okinawan citizens that if the U.S. captured them, they would be raped and even eaten by the troops, and so they were very reluctant to surrender. I think there were only like 8,000 folks that surrendered or were captured, so most of them chose to die rather than surrender. This is the museum that you're looking at here. We went into as hoping to find materials on what the 77th Infantry Division did exactly during the battle. I was able to find a history online, but there was nothing for sale here in this museum that gave the history of the battle. There was a movie being shown upstairs, which I thought was a fairly one-sided depiction of what happened during the battle, one-sided from the Japanese perspective. Of note was that the famous war correspondent Ernie Pyle had embedded himself with my dad's 77th Infantry Division, and Ernie Pyle was killed on Lajima, the small island west of Okinawa. on the 18th of April. So they finished up Lajima, and then on the 18th of April, the 77th jumped over to the main battle of Okinawa, where they helped capture the Shuri Castle and then helped drive the Japanese down to this southern tip of the island. We're going to go upstairs here pretty quick and look from the observatory, which will give you the entire lay of the land. It's really quite a large memorial park. Okay, so here's looking. This is the East Coast. And we're working our way down the East Coast, and you will in a minute see the little hill or mountain at the very southern tip of the island, which is where the Japanese caves were. Right there, that lump of land that you see that's the southern tip, and those are where the final Japanese positions were, where most committed suicide. And some of the folks from our cruise ship went in those tunnels. We didn't have time, so we didn't go. But you can see the stone, the granite blocks there with all the names inscribed where we walked earlier. You could see those in the aisles surrounding them, walkways. And they call that, Laurie, what did they call that tall white building? It was the Peace Building or something? Peace Memorial, the white tall building there. I don't know the significance of that, but again, most of the materials were battle was so significant for the U.S. These islands are 350 miles south of the main islands of Japan, and the 77th Infantry Division was preparing after this battle to invade the main island of Japan, which would have been very costly. Had they not dropped the atomic bombs on Japan in early August of 45, my dad probably would have ended up for landing on the main island of Japan, and could have been a much different result. So again, we can never forget the 12,520 lives lost